Good afternoon from London, and thank you for joining this week's Nest Center midweek briefing. My name is John Lough. I'm the head of foreign policy. We didn't have much trouble selecting this week's subject for discussion. President Trump promised a major statement on Russia on Monday. It took a somewhat unexpected form because it was the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte who summarized what had been agreed during his meeting with Trump, President Trump sitting alongside him, and Trump occasionally offered some commentary. But it really felt as though policy was being made on the hoof. In essence, Trump signaled that the US still wished to support Ukraine with weapons, but that these would be paid for by the Europeans. And the emphasis here is on strengthening Ukraine's air defense capabilities. And for this purpose, more Patriot missiles and Patriot batteries are needed, as well as, of course, the Patriot missiles. And at least 3 of these batteries will be made available to Ukraine over the coming months. As far as other weapons are concerned, there was much less clarity. Although Mark Rutte spoke about Ukraine receiving, in his words, massive numbers of weapons. Trump also declared that if Russia didn't end the war within 50 days, it would face, in his words, very severe tariffs at about 100%. It's understood that he was referring to secondary sanctions targeting Russian trade partners, presumably China and India, whose purchases of Russian oil are continuing to fuel the Russian economy and enabling the continuation of the war. Some European countries, in reaction, heaved a sigh of relief. At least Trump wasn't abandoning Ukraine. But why 50 days? And might this not be revised in line with other Trump threats in the case of tariffs? And could this have any effect on Putin and possibly change his strategy of achieving a peace settlement in Ukraine by defeating Ukraine? To discuss Russia's reading of these latest developments, we're joined by the military analyst and author Yury Fedorov. He and I first met decades ago. We were just working out when he was a professor at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. He left Russia in 2006. He later held a research position at Chatham House. And after that, he relocated to Prague, where he took on multiple roles, including writing for Radio Liberty's Russian service. He is a prolific commentator on the war in Ukraine, seemingly giving several interviews a day. I follow him on YouTube quite closely. His latest book is entitled The Ukrainian Front of the Third World War, and it was published in 2024. Yury, it's great to have you with us. And before we start, I just want to remind our viewers that there's the opportunity to ask questions or provide comments. Please use the chat function for this purpose. So, Yury, I wanted to ask you, first of all, what has been the reaction in Moscow to President Trump's statement? Is it as simple as Trump has given us 50 days to finish the war? Or do you think, is there any concern that Putin risks damaging the relationship with Trump, perhaps damaging it further, if he doesn't change course? What's your view?
Oh, yeah. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, John, for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's a great privilege for me. As for Moscow's reaction, I think that in Moscow they felt a sense of relief because they anticipated far stronger decisions Trump would make, including the immediate imposition of 100% sanctions for buyers of Russian oil, the enactment of the Graham-Blumenthal law, and the delivery of long-range missiles, JASM above all, to Ukraine. Well, now, the general gist of remarks made in Moscow, assessments made by different people close to official and high-rank circles in Moscow, is that Trump is not prepared and do not want to engage in major confrontation with Russia. And thus, Russia may continue at least for 47 days and try to reach its goals and continue military operation in Ukraine. So that is, in my understanding, based on analysis of assessments and remarks made by Russian analysts and some Russian political figures. I think that is the main assessment and main way of thinking in Moscow now.
Why do you think Trump came up with this figure of 50 days? There's been some speculation in Western media that when Trump last spoke to Putin, Putin had referred to 60 days being required for him to complete part of the, let's say, the so-called special military operation. Do you attach any importance to these 50 days? Why Trump came up with that?
No, I think so. That I think that Moscow is rather happy, but the principal point is what they can do actually in the field during this period of time. What could be their practical achievements, if any, in military field. And there are different views in Moscow on this topic, and I do think that anyhow what Russia can really achieve in these 50 days or 47 days, I do think that we must analyze two scenarios. Inertial scenario, which means that things are going on approximately in the same way as they were going during the last month. Well, and the other scenario may be called as worst case scenario, which is more dangerous for Ukraine, because this scenario, worst case scenario, may include massive missile strikes on Ukrainian lines of communication, on logistics hubs, and what is especially dangerous, on the bridges over the Dnieper. So the main idea which is discussed in this, in this school of thought in Moscow, is that Moscow should do their best, its best to win the victory, and with this in view, to destroy lines of communications. Well, but if to look at inertial scenario and with the most favorable developments for Russia, one can expect that Russian troops will begin the assault on a few Ukrainian cities like Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and approach Konstantinovka and Liman in Donetsk region. This is the main theater in the north part of Donetsk, theater. Well, these red lines shows that what Russian troops may achieve, in fact, until September 7. Well, not very impressive, I would say. Anyhow, they may achieve something. Well, but this is under the most favorable scenario, favorable developments. And if to look at the main theater in Donetsk frontier, in the Donetsk front, well, they may. Can you show the next map, please? It will be much helpful. Here it is. Well, this is Donetsk, non-occupied part of Donetsk Oblast, and the red arrows shows the main achievements, the most favorable achievements for Moscow. They may encircle Pokrovsk and began Battle of Pokrovsk. They may approach Konstantinovka, and Konstantinovka is very specific and most important key strategic point in this area. We may talk about this a little bit later, if you wish. And in the north part of this area, they may approach Slaviansk. Well, I think that it's the best scenario for Moscow. Well, once again, I do not think that in an inertial scenario, Russians will reach most goals and most important goals. Anyhow, they may reach some. Well, but if Russian aviation, Russian leadership order massive missile strikes on, for instance, on the bridge over the Dnieper, then the situation in the battlefield, in the theater, military theater, war theater, may be more difficult and more dangerous for Ukraine, including the fact that Russian troops may advance towards Sumy, Kharkiv, and Zaporozhye, and can occupy the whole Donetsk Oblast or Donetsk region. I think it could be something like that.
Thank you. So can you just possibly explain for our audience why these bridges over the Dnieper are so strategically important? I mean, isn't it surprising that Russia hasn't attacked them so far, if they are for logistical purposes so important?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that there are at least two main reasons. First reason is that the reaction of the Western countries, including the United States, including the reaction of the current American administration, and of course European countries, may be really very strong. And there are some limits some red lines which Russian government, especially Putin, do not want to cross to avoid some really very strong reaction coming from the West. So they would prefer, I think, to reach military victory without to avoid some overreaction of the Western countries. The other reason is that perhaps Russia do not have enough missiles, Iskander and Kinzhal, ballistic missiles, which are the most dangerous Russian weapon, which is very difficult to catch, to neutralize even by Patriot air defense systems, and that those missiles are necessary for Russia because they are planning some kind of military operations against the West, and they need a rather large amount of large stock of such missiles in case if the war with NATO is going on. So they would like to save some missiles, and but I would also say that with a small number of ballistic missiles that Russia can use, they cannot reach some substantial results. They cannot destroy, for instance, bridges over the Dnieper with a few tens or a few dozens of missiles. They need a few hundreds of them because those bridges were built in the late 40s and the beginning of 50s when all strategic structures were built with a view to they should function in the situation of the nuclear war. So
yes, it's quite ironic, isn't it, that the British should have been so well built that they now pose a problem for the Russian army. And I suppose we can see in the case of Ukraine's efforts to attack the Crimean bridge that it's actually very difficult to bring down bridges, even if you have a relatively large quantity of missiles. But just looking at the broader picture here, some of us who watch this situation as you do are just puzzled by the fact that Trump seemed to make Putin a very good offer back in sort of February, March, saying that the US would not allow Ukraine to join NATO. The US was basically happy for Russia to hold on to the territory that it had seized. And it would also not put US troops on the ground to police any ceasefire or peace settlement. I mean, on the face of it, for Putin, that was a pretty good deal. So why didn't he take it? What do you think?
I think that what is unacceptable for Putin in any proposals aimed at settling the conflict is that ceasefire, which is a necessary element of any regulation of any settlement of the conflict, it means that ceasefire keeps the Ukrainian military from being defeated. Well, Putin has stated quite openly his true objectives. And those are three main objectives: demilitarization of Ukraine, total neutrality of Ukraine, which includes forbidding Ukraine from forming a military relationship with any country, in addition to refusing to join NATO, and the so-called denazification, which means prohibition of anti-Russian groups and parties in Ukraine. Well, as a result, its main strategic aim of Putin at the moment, no, not only at the moment, but from the very beginning of the war, is that Ukraine should be essentially helpless against Russian expansion, and perhaps what is more significantly for Putin, will be unable to support Poland, Finland, the Baltic states, in the event if Russia attacks the Baltic region. Well, Putin would like to focus, to concentrate all his troops, or at least the lion's share of his troops, in the Baltic region, and to be more or less safe as against possible Ukrainian involvement in the war, in the future war. While at the same time, European states would like Ukraine to be a part of their, I think so, maybe I'm wrong, but I think so. I think that Europe is really very much interested in having Ukraine within its defense system. But Putin would like to prevent it. Well, and ceasefire means that Ukrainian military force will avoid being defeated. And that's why any ceasefire is unacceptable for Putin, at least at the current stage of the war.
So, I mean, that implies that he believes that Ukraine can be militarily defeated. And if we learned anything over the last 3.5 years, it is that Moscow tends to overestimate its capacity when it comes to fighting Ukraine. The Ukrainians, for various reasons, have proved much more organized and resilient than expected. So, I mean, I can see what the hope is here, but the prospects for putting this into practice, and they would suggest that this war could in fact go on for a very long time, because as you indicated, showing us those maps, that you know, there is an inertia, I think, scenario as you described it here. So, I mean, this war, it seems to me, for Putin is actually not winnable. So how is this, if we get, let's say, if we carry on for another, what, 40 plus days, we get to the point where not much has changed on the battlefield. What does Putin do next? He faces the prospect that the United States might do something that, in terms of economic measures, could hurt him a bit more, not hugely. The Europeans will, I'm pretty sure, carry on supporting Ukraine militarily. They will provide weapons and economic support. And the Ukrainians, it seems from all the data we can get our hands on at the moment, it suggests that Ukraine will carry on fighting. So this war could go on for several months yet before there might be any, you know, decisive change in the balance of forces or the situation on the battlefield. So how I'm still struggling to understand how this actually plays out for Putin if he has to keep fighting, because he can always say tomorrow the situation will look different, and he can say that in a week's time, a month's time, 6 months' time, and a year's time. What do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, Putin has no other option to behave. He is in a rather difficult position, in kind of a trap he made by his own hands for himself. But I think that he hopes, at least my impression, he hopes that sooner or later Ukraine will be not able to fight because of lack of, first of all, lack of personnel, lack of soldiers. And that is the first Putin's hope. The next Putin's hope is that the West and the United States, above all, under the current administration, will also enforce Ukraine to accept, to agree with Russian conditions. Exactly, neutrality and demilitarization. So ceasefire may be possible for Putin only in case if it is accompanied by demilitarization, and once again, it's more important for him, in my view, total neutrality. If Ukraine is if Ukraine agrees with these conditions, then ceasefire is possible. Why not? But the situation is quite clear. Ukraine cannot agree with these conditions. And I think Europe too cannot agree with this such kind of resolution of the conflict. It's definitely not in interests of, if not all European countries, but at least countries which are close to the Russia's borders. And
I agree.
Germany.
I don't think we see any sign yet that the major countries in Europe would like to force Ukraine into a virtual surrender. On the contrary, they see the dangers of this, the fact that they themselves are rearming. It's because they see a longer-term threat, posed by the current regime in Moscow, sadly. So if we step a little bit further back, and I find myself asking the question that Trump clearly believed that he could trust Putin's word. He was having these, in his words, nice conversations, and then Putin was bombing, in the evening. So he still wants to keep the door open for contacts with Putin, and I can understand the logic for that in his position, that he still believes that somehow he can be a peacemaker or a peace builder. But is there a possibility here that, okay, Trump may have misread Putin's intentions or misread him as a person, but do you think Putin might have misread Trump? I mean, after all, this is a man who decided at the end of the day to bomb Iran. And I don't think many of us would have put money on that back in February.
Well, I can only say that there are different schools of thoughts in Moscow political circles and in military circles, as far as I can judge by open information in open sources, and especially in social media, which sometimes provide more or less adequate information. Well, one point is that Putin does not believe that Trump is a strong leader. I think he believes that Trump, on the contrary, is a weak leader, and Putin, may overwhelm Trump, may enforce Trump by praising him, and at the same time by by not agreeing with Trump's proposals and ideas. So he believes that Trump, sooner or later, and not only Trump, but MAGA as a whole, as a political movement, will enforce American government and American administration to focus on China, not on Europe, but on China, which is really a very strong idea, very strong concept, typical of current American political establishment. And if so, then Putin may be, if not master of situation, but may have much stronger cards in its hands in dealing with Europe, in dealing with Ukraine. And what is the crucial factor, in my understanding, is factor of time. If Putin may reach its aims before Europe may build strong defense, then he believes he will be a winner of the situation.
Understood. Yury, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to squeeze in a last question, if I may. And that is about the equipment challenge facing the Russian army. We hear that the Russian army is really burning through those stocks of Soviet equipment that is relied on heavily during this war, and that the North Koreans, for example, are already supplying much more to Russia than before. And if this war were to go on at this level of intensity for, let's say, another 6 or 9 months, do you think that Russia would be facing some really serious challenges? The Russian army would face serious challenges in this respect?
Yeah, I think in some aspects Russia is very dependent on North Korean support, especially in artillery shells. It's true. Well, in some other areas and in some other types of weapons, Russia is more or less self-sufficient. But let's look at some figures. Well, quite recently, South Korean intelligence published a report or some information that North Korea supplied Russia since the very beginning of the war and up to, I think, end of June, with 12 millions of shells, artillery shells, which means that, as far as I can count, Russia received about 500,000 of artillery shells per month. 500,000 per month. And Russian domestic production of artillery shells is about 2.3 million per year during the last year, in 2024. So it means that per month, Russia produced somewhere less than 200,000 shells per month. So Korean supplies of artillery shells is at least twice as much as Russian domestic production.
Well, that is a remarkable statistic. Yury, we're going to have to stop there because we're out of time. I want to thank you and our audience for joining us today. And message to our audience is that we'll be back again next week, so we hope to see you then. Yury, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for this opportunity.
Thank you.